Welcome to a special end of the year episode of False Flag Weekly News. I'm Kevin Barrett, bringing on the best people I can find to rate the year's top stories. That is what happened in 2021 that we absolutely must remember. So much information comes and goes that sometimes it's hard to pick, choose, select, and focus on stuff, and we forget some of the big stories. So let's refresh our memories. Matt Ehret, he's of CanadianPatriot.org. He has a great Substack, and I think he's one of our wiser geopolitical analysts out there. He recently published a terrific piece on the sea change in West Asia that happened in 2021. It's called Checkmate. Iran is spearheading a geopolitical sea change in West Asia. And so we lined that one up with some other supporting stories about the Eurasian geostrategic pivot away from the Atlanticist bankster emperors. Let's take it away, Matt. How are you?
Hey, very good, Kevin. It was a pleasure to be on. And yeah, indeed, I thank you for pointing out that article and using that as a lunge into our conversation. I think that's one of the most important things for people to really hold on to as we go into 2020, which is going to be a very stormy 2020, but still there is hope on the horizon. I mean, hard to see if you're living here in the transatlantic unipolar basket case cage. A lot of
the belly of the basket case beast.
Very good. Difficult to see, but if you keep your mind's eye focused on humanity as a whole, there are very good reasons to be hopeful. And that's why
West Asia is one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's finally really a strong coalition of nations, which was really Zbigniew Brzezinski's greatest nightmare, of Russia, China representing two great civilizations, two cultural matrices, and increasingly now we've seen brought online over the past year, Iran representing a third sort of pillar, in this new coalition representing, 140 nations are already on board the Belt and Road Initiative, and Iran has really broken through on multiple levels of trade, security, economic partnerships, and creating a new set of relationships in the Middle East, where just going back, 5 years ago, it's completely unrecognizable what we're seeing right now, where there are, through the Belt and Road Initiative, this new sphere of thinking about win-win cooperation and Iran's participation in this, which we can talk about later. We have now Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan organizing with Iran new pipelines and rail going up through Iran into Georgia through Azerbaijan. You've got rail from Iran into Turkey, new security partnerships as well with the UAE. As well as with Turkey, and also Iraq and Iran building a rail together, which could easily extend into Syria. And this could be part of a broader reconstruction, which we know Bashar al-Assad finally has a strong ally with China and with Russia and with Iran, who's said openly that he wants to revive the 5C's vision, this integration of rail and development corridors for industrial growth policy for his region, as well as all interconnecting the great 5C systems in that zone, all can coalesce around Syria. This is something which China is definitely synergistic with. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of hope right now.
So Eurasia is coming back to its normal natural role as the center of humanity's activities, right? The population, productivity.
Exactly. Yeah, we've been in a very Western Atlanticist orientation for a long time, and we've forgotten that for most of human history, it has not been the case. And in fact, no, the old Silk Road idea of East-West relations, but also now it has taken on, this has been revived with a North-South compartment too, with the Polar Silk Road, where rail and shipping is moving deep into Russia, into Siberia and beyond, as well as Southern, we're talking really Southern into Africa, into the entire global South, even in South America. There's a heavy shift of emphasis towards this pro-China, Russia development orientation, which is based on building real things over 25, 10, 20, 50-year project orientations, which we once had a long time ago before I was born here in the West, which we have completely forgotten. And now we've just fallen into this very myopic power imposition Hobbesian mentality, which has really led us down a path to hell very fast. So I hope that we can recover this way of thinking by the example being shown by the superior mode of thinking and of planning economic policy and security policy. But my hopes are not too high right now, unfortunately.
Well, Zbigniew Brzezinski is not really high up on either of our lists as a hero or a visionary or anything, but actually he did write the Grand Chessboard, and in it he said that Iran is maybe the most central player in the Grand Chessboard, and that the U.S. absolutely must do everything possible to cultivate the friendship of Iran, because without it, the U.S. is totally doomed in its quixotic effort to continue this impossible domination of the world from a perch over in this little island of North America. And the Eurasia plus Africa, especially the northern part of Africa, is absolutely central to the world's population and productivity. And right there at the center of that is Iran. And yet the US has been needlessly messing with Iran and antagonizing Iran. So Brzezinski's prophecy has been fulfilled, right? That the center of the Grand Chessboard has been lost in 2021. The US kicked out of Afghanistan and hobbled. It's obviously not going to be able to roll back Iran. So is this game over?
Well, I think that I don't see how a geopolitician of a Brzezinskiite sort of character would be able to get out of this type of configuration that's just occurred on his Grand Chessboard. It looks like it's been knocked over in a very positive way, because the games were the rules of the game that were set out by the unipolarists were a rigged game. If you play by their rules, you lose. It's like going into a casino thinking you can beat the house. It's designed to screw you over if you play by their rules, which is why creativity and the future is the breaking of the rules. The rules that they want to keep us in mentally is that what exists now is all that could ever exist, and all we can do is fight for diminishing returns in a world of scarcity. That's the zero-sum logic of Zbignew's dystopic worldview. So the fact that, yeah, Iran is completely shifted its gears. It is not being seduced into playing by those rules. It is now working with, a very forward-thinking orientation. I think this is really very important. And I see you brought up there the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Yeah, that's it. I mean, this is something very important that Iran is now full-blown member of. It's been in discussion now for 16, 17 years.
And the West is freaking out as Iran joins the SCO and starts normalizing, or not normalizing, I mean, signing ties with China. They have this trade and military partnership that again began in 2021. So again, this looks like 2021 is the year of the empire getting checkmated by what's happening at the center of the board, which is Iran.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is now going into its final stages. It's signed as of March 2021, the 25-year, $400 billion trade deal with China. And this doesn't just include security issues or oil. I mean, yes, China will be getting discounted oil from Iran, but in return, they're going to be supplying very major, very needed long-term development aid that will deal with a variety of issues, including developing energy infrastructure. Iran has some of the biggest deposits of oil and gas in the world. Unfortunately, due to sanctions and other economic warfare measures, they haven't been able to develop those powers properly to tap into and utilize for the greater good their own resources. So China's investment there is going to be vital, with other broad spectrum infrastructure investments. Also, keep in mind, this goes with Russia has done. Russia has an Iran-Russia strategic partnership as well for 20 years. That's also being finalized currently, dealing with many of the same things, perhaps on a smaller monetary number. But absolutely, this is really key. And also, last thing I would just say on the SCO, this really offsets the NATO of the Pacific in a serious way, because India, who has been courted by the rules-based orderistas, they were brought into the Democracy Summit, and it's been a trophy to be used as part of this NATO of the Pacific attack on China. The day that the Democracy Summit was kicking off was the day that Putin was invited, big surprise, to India, where he signed major memoranda of understanding, as well as on a whole variety of topics, military, defense, space, nuclear power development, as well as the North-South transportation corridor, which is also tied to increasingly the Belt and Road Initiative. This goes from Russia all the way to India through Iran. India also agreed to make deals with Russia based on rubles and rupees as well, to de-dollarize. So they made it their statement of intent very clear, and they are also a part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization with Pakistan. So all of these countries that have been set at each other's throats over the past decades of British Anglo-American imperial warfare are finally overcoming these trappings and are finally realizing that there's a common self-interest that's higher than territorial disputes or other transgressions and revanchism that's been holding them back.
And what about the role of de-dollarizing? Part of the issue has been the way the U.S. is able to impose sanctions and choke people off, and also take de facto imperial tribute. Now, here in this slide, we have the Iranian intense activities that include military drills with Russia and China happening in the Persian Gulf. But whether they'll ever actually have to fight and how this all works out in the long term may depend more on the economic war. And as you say, if the world de-dollarizes, that will be a complete game changer. The U.S. has been taking de facto imperial tribute from the world by forcing the world to operate in dollars now since Nixon went off the gold standard in the early 70s. So do you see a big move coming in the next few years that will take the dollar's value down substantially?
Yeah, sure. Well, it already is. I mean, number one, the U.S. financial system onto itself is a ticking time bomb that can do nothing but explode. The debt that is supporting the hyper leveraged speculative assets in derivative markets and other things is unpayable intrinsically, and it's only accelerated under this scamdemic over the past 2 years. But the system is going to blow up with or without what Eurasia is doing. China, for people in America who have been freaked out about China being all bad, the cause of all their problems, no, China has actually stopped the US from collapsing several times over by buying massive amounts, trillions of US debt. They don't want that. They would rather have real development and cooperative partnership, but they know that if the US collapses, the way some actually desire, who are the ones who are running much of the West from a top-down perspective, China is not going to do well. They're in a much better place now than they were 5 years ago. So is Russia, but they don't want that. And they've been saving us from that collapse up until now, giving us as many chances as possible to reevaluate our bad thinking. But they are prepared, and they've been by being kicked out of SWIFT. Russia, China, both have been threatened with being kicked out of SWIFT, especially Russia. Iran is already kicked out. Sanction regimes unilaterally have really crippled a lot of economies. But at this point, this has only caused greater integration of the Eurasian powers, and alternatives to SWIFT have been brought online. There's a Russian version, a Chinese version that are already doing a lot of trade. And I think what we're going to see is that is going to increasingly amplify over the coming year, 2022 and 2023. Unless there is some return to real development, because the US economy doesn't have any productive value backing up the dollars. It's just hyperinflationary fake monopoly money. The only way to infuse real value on top of systemic change involving, obviously, a debt jubilee to eliminate all of the impossible debt that will never be paid in a zillion years. You have to do structural things like that, obviously. Breaking up the too big to fails. You have to do that. I don't know if there's political moral will capable of doing that in the US on a federal level, but I'm just saying that it has to happen. But then you have to start investing in the real economy again. Whatever little value exists that we've destroyed over 50 years of globalization, you have to put it back to work to build back real, not build back better here, not Green New Deal.
Wait a minute.
But you need to create real value like Franklin Roosevelt did in the 1930s, or Lincoln did with the transcontinental, but you have to build things that will support real life and that have measurable value. The way the BRI works on a very different economic paradigm than the speculative basket cases here in the West. So just, yeah.
So this is a totally different paradigm from the war paradigm. War is in a way sort of destroying value. War is a big festival of just blowing things up and destroying things, taking human life and making everything worse.
Yeah.
Where were we here? So and that leads to the observation that the only way that these guys are likely to see a chance of maintaining their empire is through this kind of vandalism and stirring things up. We have various flashpoints. There's, of course, the South China Sea. And we're seeing a lot of saber rattling around Ukraine at this point. We just saw an ultimatum coming from Russia saying that, you guys promised not to extend NATO eastward back when the Soviet Union broke up, and you didn't keep your promise. But this process now has to end. There's a red line. Former Soviet republics, such as Ukraine, cannot come into NATO, whereas NATO is officially committed to making it possible for Ukraine to enter. So this looks like a flashpoint. And then, of course, Iran, as we talked about earlier, is another flashpoint where the Bibi Netanyahu types, the Likudniks over in Israel, would like nothing better than to start a big regional war. And they think they can drag the U.S. into it. And they've been trying now for quite some time. So war is always a possibility when you have a great power that senses that it's about to go down. What can we do to try to avert that from actually happening?
Well, I know you sent me this Patrick Armstrong article, which was very good, I found. And, I personally don't think that a nuclear war is the most likely scenario. Looking at the type of military technologies that has been brought online and made public by Russia and also China, but especially Russia, in terms of hypersonic capabilities of delivering a nuclear warhead, things that are just leaping far ahead of the sort of level of tech in military systems of that are active in the West, especially in the United States, which much of it is very outdated. I don't think that it is possible to necessarily carry out the type of unipolar, full frontal, full spectrum dominance type of warfare, which was formerly believed by many geopoliticians for many years under Cheney, under Obama. The idea that you could do a first strike on Russia and China, take out their capacity to respond, and then just declare unipolar hegemony. That does not seem possible. What I do see, though, both in the case of Taiwan and Ukraine, is there is an effort to try to bait China and Russia into making the first move so that it would appear as though they are seen by the world community as being the invaders of small countries or something, even though Taiwan's not even a country, but it's the same formula. And what they're trying to do, and we saw this with the Democracy Summit about 3 weeks ago, right? Where half of the world was excluded from this Democracy Summit of a zone of influence. These are countries that those controlling the rules-based order believe they could lock into their controlled area, while they've given up on the idea of being able to have dominance over China, Russia for now. And I think the idea is to create a new Iron Curtain, full hog, cutting off all trade, all forms of communication on a variety of levels, like in the old days of the Cold War, while they consolidate their power in the transatlantic zone primarily, which we see with the Great Reset, all of this Malthusian insanity and poison, which has really taken over. Obviously totalitarian fascism has moved at a very fast pace since 2020. And at the idea being that maybe they could subvert or work on a more longer term cultural subversion level to play a longer game and maybe come back in a decade with a more weakened cultural atmosphere in Russia or China as a gamble. I don't think that the nuclear war thing, it's possible. I'm saying it is certainly possible, but I don't think it is the most dangerous thing right now. And Patrick Armstrong in his article laid out, well, what are these red lines? Putin obviously made a very rational demand for the West to put on paper commitments to do certain very common sense things, like not absorb Ukraine into NATO, not put missiles in Ukraine, not do provocative military maneuvers on Russia's border. Are those controlling Biden going to agree to that? I don't think that they will. And what are the types of responses Russia is capable of delivering on a diplomatic, economic, military level, economic level? Patrick Armstrong went through a whole list, which I think it's a very good thought experiment of what they're capable of doing, and it's very strong. It's a very strong list and very realistic list that indicates to me that the West cannot win this game on that domain, at least. And Russia has not fallen for the debate. I don't think that Russia or China, they've exhibited a lot of self-restraint. They've been provoked many times over, and they have not, even going back to Tiananmen Square, China did not go in with the way that they were expected to, with full-blown iron fist shutdowns of the provocateurs who were trying for a color revolution in 1989. Russia did not go in full hog against Turkey when the Russian pilot was killed by Turkey in 2016. Russian diplomats were killed in 2014-15, 14 of them. They didn't go in. The Russian airliners were shut down in Egypt and in Turkey. Russia didn't go in. They never fall for the bait for those sorts of things. So I think that they have confidence, they have wise political leadership, real statecraft underway. And I think that the best thing that they could do is probably simply just recognize, and I heard a good presentation from an advisor to the Ukrainian government, who's a very rational young woman, who made a point, like, it would be a wise thing for Russia to simply recognize Donetsk or Lugansk as republics according to the Minsk agreements that have an autonomous sort of quality, which has been completely ignored by Kiev and NATO, but just simply recognize them. And that and also, I'll avoid the also, but there's certain things that they could do on a diplomatic level to shift the gears in their favor even more than it already is.
So they pretty much already have the long game set up. It's that they really have checkmated the West in a certain sense in terms of Eurasia inevitably coming together, as even the real rabid opponents of this process, like Brzezinski, admitted that it was inevitable. Brzezinski in the Grand Chessboard says it's going to happen by the 2030s at the latest, but now it looks like it's sped up by almost half, probably mainly due to the stupidity of the empire in launching its 9/11 wars during the first 2 decades of the century and wasting its power on totally counterproductive wars, bankrupting itself, destroying its moral authority, and going after precisely the countries that should be its allies, especially Iran, which is the number one target of the 9/11 series of wars, and which, as Brzezinski said, should have been a U.S. Friend and ally at virtually any cost. So that chess game has been played out, and I think we see who's winning. And ultimately, I'd have to say it's probably the good guys, because, as you know, Matt, the empire is run by Malthusian ultra elitists who don't seem to have the best interests of ordinary folks at heart. And these rival Eurasian blocs seem to have more of the leadership that actually is interested in the well-being of their ordinary citizens. Now, they have their imperfections and corruption as well, but that's another topic for another day, because we hit the end of this one. Well, thank you so much, Matt Ehret. It's always wonderful catching up with you. I appreciate your really quite astounding output. You're really publishing at a rapid clip, very in-depth analyses, and I think you're on the right track on almost all of them. So keep up the great work.
Thanks, Kevin. All right,
have a great 2022. I'm sure I'll check in with you pretty soon.
Yeah, see you next year.
Okay, see ya.